Hey friends, I got a quick question for you. What do Red from Overly Sarcastic Productions and Kim Kardashian have in common? Well, they're both into Hermes. Well, at least in Red's case, it's Hermes, and Kim's it's Hermes. That's what we're checking out today. Welcome back, friends, and a special welcome to all the new friends out there. I'm YoBGS. Apologizing, this video is a little late today. A new Ninja Turtles game came out, and I kind of lost track of time. But that being said, I did want to get back into Overly Sarcastic's Miscellaneous Myths, because I wish I knew something like to be able to break down a topic this well. The only thing I know pretty much is like 90s cartoons. I mean, if you want to see that, leave a comment down below and maybe I'll make some videos on that. Also, if you dig these, please make sure to subscribe. It helps the channel out more than you know, and I've hit kind of that summer lull lately, so if you subscribe, it helps the channel out a ton. Now, time for me to forget everything I've known about Hermes and prepare to get my mind blown.
What's the Greek god you see the most influence of in your everyday life? Wrong, it's Hermes. Hermes.
Well, thanks for even giving me an opportunity to get that one wrong.
It's Hermes, kinda hope you're not dealing with that daily,
What is that? A number? Is that Mercury?
but still Hermes. Hermes, known to the Romans as Mercury, was the
I guess it is. God of roads and journeys, travelers, merchants, wait a minute, trade and commerce, athletes, thieves, and trickery. Okay, so being the god of merchants and the god of thieves, I feel like that's a good, sustainable business model there. Very young compared to the other Olympian gods, son of Zeus, who isn't, and the Pleiad Maya, and Mycenaean,
ancient Greek god of roads, journeys, merchants, thieves, athletes, trickery, and a handful of other related things. He was predominantly recognized as a messenger god, but he was also revered as an underworld god and a psychopomp responsible for guiding the souls of the dead. He also pulled a triple shift guiding dreams and had a hobby on the side of helping out mortal heroes when they got wrapped up in sticky situations.
Which, by the way, reminds me or lets me know from the few of these that we've watched so far, that means that Hermes is probably a very old god. Not in terms of Hermes' age, but like, Hermes is a god that's been around a long time, because it feels like the longer a god has been around, the more responsibilities they tend to have.
With that many jobs, it's no wonder he's so widespread these days. What a millennial icon. So before we start in on the whole historical...
Wait a minute.
What a millennial...
It's funny because minimum wage can't pay rent. Oh my god, that's why we all have many side hustles.
Icon. So before we start in on the whole historical context, character development thing, let's do a quick rundown of where exactly Hermes stands in the mythology of ancient Greece. Hermes is very young by Olympian standards, only Dionysus is canonically younger. He's born to the Pleiad Maya in the mountain in Arcadia, and
which is also funny, by the way, because Dionysus is like the god of wine, and so of course the young ones would be the most mischievous.
is unsurprisingly the son of Zeus, like roughly 7% of all of ancient Greece. But Hermes sets himself apart from the other Olympians by getting his shenaniganery underway literally the day he's born. According to the Homeric hymn to Hermes, the first thing he does after being born is find a tortoise, kill it, and turn its shell into a lyre. Then he gets hungry, so he does the only rational thing and steals 50 of Apollo's sacred cattle. Oh, but what if Apollo notices they're missing? Well, obviously Hermes reverses their hooves first, so it looks like they're walking backwards.
Oh my god, like of course... I always love the origin stories, and the fact that Hermes just out of the gate is ridiculous. Let's see. Or they just walk backwards. The translation I read implied he physically reversed the hooves. Don't at
Duh, you guys. Anyway, Hermes stows the cows and starts a fire so he can sacrifice some meat to the gods, including himself, of course. And then he scoots back home and puts on a helpless baby act, but his mom isn't buying it. So instead, Hermes explains to her that this is all part of his cunning plan to put himself on the Olympians' radar so he can get them both the respect and honor they deserve.
As a baby, he's having this conversation with his mom.
Instead of, living in a cave. Meanwhile, Apollo has finally noticed his cows are missing, and after a little detective work, he tracks down Hermes.
Yeah, this glowing baby gave me 20 bucks to not tell anyone about the cows.
After a little detective work, he tracks down...
But you gotta give him this. His plan worked, right? So Hermes is the god of any publicity is good publicity, right? Immediately go out, cause trouble, and now all of a sudden... He's headed to the Pantheon.
Hermes in Maya's cave. Apollo interrogates Hermes, who insists he's just a widow baby who doesn't know anything about any cows, so Apollo brings him to Zeus, who thinks this entire situation is absolutely hilarious. Zeus tells Hermes to guide Apollo to the cows, and on the way, Hermes wins Apollo
Life is old there, older than
over
the
by
trees.
Playing the lyre for him. Apollo is so enchanted that he
Oh my
promises
god! So is Hermes now the god of West Virginia as well?
Be the messenger of the gods, and he and his mother will be honored among the Olympians. He trades his role of herdsman for Hermes' lyre, and the two of them return to Olympus. And in exchange for Hermes promising never to rob him again, Apollo also gives him his caduceus, a small staff with two snakes coiled around it, usually seen as a symbol of like messengers and heralds, but it's also very
much in like medicine, is it not?
Very specifically a symbol of Hermes. So Hermes makes his debut as a
But I swear that isn't that the symbol of like nursing? Or am I thinking about something entirely different?
trickster underdog wrangling an improbable victory through cunning and trickery. And despite winning untold power and fame in the process, somehow still manages to come across as a tricksy underdog for centuries to come. Neat trick. Hermes makes regular appearances in mythology, playing a supporting role in both the
funnily enough, in that respect, Hermes almost reminds me of a lot of like inspo for anime, right? The character that always looks like the underdog, the character that is always going to be underestimated by opponents, yet essentially is set up in a position to win all the time.
This is a tricksy underdog for centuries to come. Neat trick. Hermes makes regular appearances in mythology, playing a supporting role in both the Iliad and the Odyssey.
But why does
appearances in
why
mythology,
in this painting does he have a World War I anti-munitions helmet? And then I like the cow in the background, because you would assume he would be associated with
both the Iliad and the Odyssey. In the Iliad, though he was allied with the Achaeans for the majority of the book, he also protected King Priam when he traveled to the Achaean camp to retrieve the body of his son Hector. And in the Odyssey, Hermes provided regular help and advice to Odysseus, including helping him confront Circe to break her enchantment on his men, and later guiding the dead souls of the suitors to the afterlife. This extra special deific assistance might have been because Odysseus is actually his great-grandson, the grandkid of his son Autolycus, who
Autolycus the wolf itself, bandit, shapeshifter, always favored by Hermes, but only his son, his only son? Oh, only his son post-Odyssey, named Odysseus.
Who is a notorious bandit, trickster, and shapeshifter. Runs in the family, I guess. One of Hermes' most well-known accomplishments is killing the
You would assume that shapeshifting, though, would be, genetically passed on. But okay, so at this point, obviously, Hermes is not still a baby.
Hundred-eyed giant Argus. In the myth of Io, for somewhat complicated reasons, the nymph Io ends up getting turned into a cow and kept under the watchful guard of Argus. Zeus asks Hermes to free her, so Hermes disguises himself as a simple.
Oh, wait a minute, that's hilarious!
Getting turned.
This is Argus is hilarious to me because there's a character in Link to the Past named Argus that is literally made up of eyeballs. So I'm positive that's what it's based off of, but it rung that bell in my head.
Cow and kept under the watchful guard of Argus. Zeus
because that 90s nostalgia is hitting me hard today.
Asks Hermes to free her, so Hermes disguises himself as a simple shepherd, lures Argus to sleep with a long and boring story about the creation of the panpipes, then cuts off his head. To commemorate the occasion, Hermes is most frequently referred to with the epithet Argefontes, meaning Argus Slayer. Hermes has a handful of other appearances in popular Greek mythology. He frequently helps out errant heroes like Perseus and Orestes by giving them the means to sneak around invisibly or fool their enemies. In fact, this trickery is a major characteristic of Hermes. Hermes is the god of liars and thieves, along with all the other stuff in his purview. And while these
Why would they want a god like that in the pantheon? And I guess it's like a family thing, right? Zeus is kind of like Vin Diesel, and once you're in the family, once you're invited to the barbecue, you're good to go. But like, I don't know, if there was a god that was cutting off the heads of other gods and just causing all manner of problems, you figure that would be a nice way to get exiled somewhere. But I guess, and you can't even say that being Zeus's son is the reason that they would keep him, because Zeus has like all of the sons.
May seem like kind of unheroic qualities for a god to instill. Actually, most Greek heroes were tricksters or underdogs on some level. Even Heracles, who was the best equipped person on the planet to solve all his problems with sheer brute force, still had to be clever on occasion, like when he tricked Atlas into taking back the sky. So even though Odysseus got a bit of a bad rap for being all trickery all the time, in practice, trickery was a well-respected heroic trait when used in moderation, and it was thanks in large part to Hermes' influence. Now, before we get to the history, there's one wacky thing to know about Hermes that we're going to look into a little more later.
Only
and that's these things. These are called Hermes. They were boundary and border markers found along roadways. They usually had Hermes' head, although that varies.
Dude, they're also hilarious because why is there a door knock? Oh. Never mind. But why would you... If you're gonna put two... What? If you're gonna put two... Maybe they point north? I don't know. But I was like, these clearly were added in late. Yeah. I was about to
These
say
are
though
called
that
Hermes.
like
They were
these, you see this in Vaporwave all the time. Like they use the heads of the like a lot of the Greek statues, and because this is very easily cropped, I'm guessing that's why they
boundary
use
and
it.
border markers found along roadways. They
Funnily enough, they left off the door knocker part.
usually had Hermes' head, although that varied, and they always had a dong. I don't know why the dong is non-negotiable, but yeah, with Hermes being a god of boundaries and borders,
All dongs lead to Rome. That's why.
it kind of makes sense that he'd be on most of these road markers, but at the same time, it's still a little weird, and not just because of the dong situation. So let's hold off on investigating that for a bit and get to the history. So, first things first, Hermes used to be Pan. Let me explain. Now, the Greek god Pan is a mysterious...
I was very disturbed. I did not think this. I thought that was something else. And given the position, never mind. That's not important. But
figure.
you can't just drop that a third of the way into the biography.
Not purposefully, he's just really old, so there's not much clear information available about his origins or development. Pan, as he was characterized in the era of ancient Greece, is
God of the wilderness, shepherds, flocks, nature, mountains, wilds, fields, groves, glens, sex, fertility, theatrical criticism. Oh, I get it. Because you pan something. Companion to the nymphs responsible for Pan-ic, literally legendum.
is generally considered to be a rustic wild god. Officially, he's the god of forests, mountain wilderness, fertility, shepherds and flocks, but he's also got a bunch of other wacky characteristics on the side. His worship was almost...
Wait a minute, is that... So we consider a legendary to be a wacky characteristic? Oh, I bet he gets into all sorts of goofy situations with that thing.
Exclusively found in the mountainous inland region of Arcadia, which is also Hermes' birthplace. And Arcadia was known for being inland,
I'm familiar with the skies of Arcadia.
forested, and very old compared to the rest of Greece. Pan, as a wild god, wasn't really worshipped in built structures. He was worshipped in natural caves and only ever had 2 constructed temples, one of them in Peloponnese. In the mythology, Pan is considered older than the Olympians. He's credited with having gifted Artemis her hunting dogs and Apollo his gift of prophecy. He's most commonly known for 2 things that both bear his name: panpipes and panic. Pan created the syrinx, or panpipes, when a nymph he was chasing turned herself into reeds to escape, so he turned her into a musical instrument he could put his lips all over. Bit twisted. Now,
Yeah, no kidding. Wait, so, yeah. But then, how, and I know we're gonna find this out soon, but how would one of the oldest gods then somehow get re-codified as one of the younger gods?
panic, we all know, describes a kind of fear so intense that it borders on madness. Pan is specifically credited as being responsible for panic. He would yell in the woods, and anyone who heard it would be inflicted with panic. He could supposedly rout entire armies with it. Now, we know some stuff about Pan, but there's a lot about him that's very vague and fuzzy. His parentage, for example, is incredibly vague and varied, suggesting he's very old, because that's the kind of myth that takes a while to drift. And in fact, Pan is probably older than Mycenaean Greece. See, those comparative mythology scholars working to reconstruct the Proto-Indo-European religion that spawned off the Vedic, Norse, and Greek mythologies theorize that Pan is an offshoot of the Proto-Indo-European pastoral god... this.
Well, and while I can't read that, and I don't know much about Mycenaean history apart from what I've learned from Red, I do know that, yes, I would assume a god of fertility and a god of pasture for a species that is consisting of, hunter-gatherers, like that, doing the nasty and farming, those are like the first 2 things we did. And then we hit stuff with clubs, but so you would think if we were going to worship any deity for any reason, it would be the promotion of those 2 things.
Whose only other known offshoot is Pushan, a Vedic pastoral deity. The Rig Veda, which mentions Pushan, might be as old as 1700 BC, so if Pan is an offshoot of the same god, he most likely predates the Mycenaean age that started in 1600 BC. Now the thing is,
Wait a minute! Iliad, Odyssey, Homeric hymns written, Pompeii gets toasted. I thought Jesus time? I thought Jesus time was 30 AD.
Started in 1600 BC. Now the thing is, due to a lack of written sources, we don't know much about how Pan was characterized before ancient Greece. But Pushan can give us a lot of information by proxy. Pushan is the Vedic deity of journeys, roads, travel, pastoralism, herding,
cattle herding and feeding, the sun as a guardian figure, the sun as a herdsman, is also paralleled by Apollo in his role in the Homeric hymn, also served as a psychopomp. What is that? Associated with goats, got all his teeth knocked out. How do we know this last one? But again, traveling for a nomadic people, herding, feeding, for farming people. Like, these are all things you would expect from a very early god.
And a handful of other things. He's also a psychopomp. Did you notice these are all things Hermes is a god of? So the theory, and it's not actually my theory, this is generally accepted these days, is that way back, in or before the Mycenaean age, Hermes was split from Pan, and before that, original Pan was very similar to Pushan, a liminal god of navigating between places like Rhodes, the general wilderness, and the journey to the afterlife. When this original Pan was subdivided, Pan retained his pastoralist and herding connotations, but all the Rhodes and journey stuff went to Hermes, leaving Pan quite reduced. And it's worth noting that Hermes also has some herding associations. Now, this theory isn't just based.
It's also funny to me how this Pan looks very demonic, and then these two are just a mood.
Noting that Hermes also has some herding associations. Now, this theory isn't just based on the fact that Hermes has general similarities to a Vedic deity. Pan and Hermes also have some other weird connections. For one, their origins are both in Arcadia, as are their centers of worship. For another, in some versions of the mythology, Pan,
Apollo, Penelope, or Penelope Hermes, or Hermes Dryope, or Dionysus and Dryad are all ways that Pan happened?
Pan is Hermes' son? Now that's a damn weird connection, but it makes sense to link them in a backwards kind of way. And, surprisingly relevant, Hermes and Pan are both mythically notorious for having some serious dongage going on. So let's circle back to the Herms. Now
if you're gonna be known for one thing,
word Herm literally means piled stones. It's not a name. Hermes' name is not a name, and Herms are a very old concept in that region, older than ancient Greece, and older than Hermes. Before they were sculpted statues, roads were demarcated with heaps of stones, but the lack of human features didn't make them any less sacred. Herms were revered. It was customary to throw a stone on the heap or anoint it with oil if you were feeling particularly devout, and messing with them or later defacing them was seen as this horrible affront. And Pan, as the old deity of roads and journeys, was probably the god revered through the Herms. Now, remember back in the Aphrodite video when I mentioned divine epithets and how they described the capacity a god was being worshipped in?
I do, sort of.
We don't actually know for certain, but it seems very likely that way back in the day, Pan had some kind of Herm-related epithet describing him as Pan of the piled boundary stones. And also way back in the day, this—
Well, so then that makes sense as to why Hermes would be those guide stones on the road, right? The fact that instead of a literal pile of stones, the statues used as guideposts were just carvings of him.
The epithet got separated from him into its own deity, Hermes. Now, this all happened very early, so we don't really know why Hermes separated from Pan. It might have been because Pan was a fairly specialized deity and his worship was having trouble expanding beyond the more rustic wildlands, so they peeled off this brand spanking new deity with so much mass market appeal he's literally still showing up on brand labels. Whatever the original reason, we know Hermes is attested in Mycenaean Linear B inscriptions, or at least a word that sounds like Hermes, and that means Hermes split from Pan well before we have any sort of proper records. By the time the 800s hit and Homer starts writing his epics, Hermes is firmly established, as evidenced by his role in the Iliad, and Pan has already been reduced to a simple wilderness god. Oh, before we move on, here's a fun fact about Pan. Some of you who are well acquainted with Greek mythological esoterica, or just read the Percy Jackson books,
I mean, yeah, because there's a lot of those,
may have heard that Pan is canonically dead. According to Plutarch,
I don't know. I always feel like most gods are living in this state of both alive and dead in a really weird, like they've transcended the two.
Writing around 100 AD, a mere handful of decades earlier, during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, a divine voice called out from the Isle of Paxi to a sailor named Thamos and told him to tell everyone that the great god Pan was dead. Thamos obliged, and everyone was slightly bummed to hear that Pan was dead. However, Pan didn't actually seem to be dead in any meaningful sense. His shrines were still frequented, his worship still happened, so what was all that about? Well, this whole thing might be a hilarious misunderstanding. Do you remember in my old—
You don't say! A dude was sailing, had a voice tell him to say Pan was dead, and he just said okie doke, and then went back and did exactly that.
Underworld Myths video, I mentioned that Ishtar had a dead boyfriend named Tammuz, and in my Aphrodite video, I elaborated that Tammuz had his own cult and it had been brought to Greece. Well, in ancient Greek, the sentence, Thamos, the great god Pan is dead, is read as Thamos pan megas tethneke. But there's this funny little thing in Greek. Pan, along with being the god's name, is a prefix, meaning all. So this sentence could be, Thamos, Pan the Great is dead. Or it could be, Tammuz the All-Great is dead. So this whole thing about Pan being dead might have been the result of some sailors overhearing the cult of Tammuz praising Tammuz for his sole accomplishment and thought they were hearing them tell some dude named Tammuz that the god named Pan had died. Anyway, I thought that was the funniest thing in the world when
It's amazing. And then, again, these myths are a great giant game of telephone, and sometimes one busted link in the chain just completely screws it up.
learned it. You're welcome for that wacky anecdote to share at parties. Back to Hermes. Now, in the early days of ancient Greece, Hermes didn't actually look too dissimilar to Pan. In the Archaic Age, between 800 and 500 BC, Hermes was always represented as an older, bearded man. In classical and Hellenistic Greece, his image changed to the one we recognize now. An athlete, young, beardless, and mostly naked. Dionysus also underwent a similar transformation. Maybe the Romans just weren't into older dudes. Speaking of, we should really talk about Mercury, the Roman version of Hermes. Now, most Roman versions of Greek gods started off as fully developed deities in their own right. For example, Mars, the parallel to Ares, was originally an agricultural deity as well as a war god, and most notably wasn't treated with anywhere near as much contempt as Ares was within his own pantheon. For the most part, the other Roman gods were also full-fledged deities, though sometimes they got a little confused and accidentally mashed other gods together, like Pluto, Hades' Roman equivalent, who was accidentally—
I think it was it either in the Aphrodite video or, the Dionysus video. Dionysus got, like, mashed with everything.
both the underworld god Pluton and the wealth god Plutus. But Mercury? Mercury didn't exist. The name Mercury has uncertain etymology, but probably derives either from the Latin root of merchant or from an older word for boundary. Either way, the name is a literal descriptor of one of Hermes' divine duties, and has no history beyond that. Mercury did seem to absorb a handful of minor Roman deities.
Basically a burn book of assorted pagan gods intended to explain why the— Of course it is!
Called the Dei Lucri, a collective of minor gods of profit, specifically immoral profit that comes from bad sources. But basically, Mercury was literally just the Roman name for Hermes. I'm not sure why they bothered. They didn't make up a Latin name for Apollo, but it is what it is. Now, during the Roman era, Hermes/Mercury was incredibly popular. Since Rome was all about that expansion, Hermes' status as the god of trade and merchants saw a lot of use. He turned up on the coinage, his sculptures are all over Pompeii, and there's one other quirk of his that made him so popular. See, Rome had this policy that whenever they subsumed another culture, they treated that culture's gods as their own. Literally, they found the Roman god that most closely resembled the local god and insisted they were the same. First they did it with the Greeks, and then when they dealt with the Celts, this led to Mercury being syncretized with Lugus, known in Ireland as Lugh and in Wales as Lugh. Also Lugh? I don't know, man. I'm sorry, wait.
Close enough. I feel like you need the accent to be able to pronounce the differentiation there.
Who was broadly seen as a big stonkin' deal, as in the creator of all arts, along with being a badass warrior hero king and stuff. The Romans
also
saw
looking like Jack Perry, Jungle Boy.
him as a patron of commerce, so he was equated with the commercial-friendly Mercury. And if that's not wacky enough for you, when the Romans dealt with Germanic peoples, they equated Mercury with motherfucking Odin.
What? How did they come up with that?
Mercury with motherfucking Odin. Was it because they were travelers? Was it because they were psychopomps? Was it that style and hat staff combo? Unclear! But the Romans were certain that the Germanic people worshipped Mercury as Odin. The Ptolemaic Greeks also syncretized Hermes with a few different gods, including Thoth and Anubis. Thoth because of their mutual cleverness and I guess tendency to write stuff down, and Anubis because of their shared psychopomp duties. Hermes was all over the place, which is honestly very appropriate. Hermes also turns up in a lot of—
It feels like Hermes was like the end-all be-all. Like if they got stumped somewhere and they're like, oh, that's a god that doesn't really sound like our— then all of a sudden it was just Hermes.
Aesop's fables for some reason. Don't know
And they would just retcon.
Hermes is a versatile god, but I can't say for certain why he's so literally iconic. There are some possibilities. Maybe his speed and mobility resonates well with our modern high-speed society. Maybe he's one of the few Olympians to combine likable character traits with a general lack of distractingly awful character flaws. Maybe it's just because medicine, communication, and capitalism are kind of central to most societies.
And also nowadays speed, right? The expedience of trade, the expedience of travel, like all of these things combine, like we do all of the things that he represented, and we also have a desire to do them faster.
And they're also central to what he represents.
Which is also what he represents.
Whatever the reason, Hermes' liminal status helps him get into the cracks of almost any society and then just stay there forever, turning up in unexpected places centuries down the line. He's got this certain je ne sais quoi, keeping him in the popular consciousness long after the rest of his pantheon faded into novelty or obscurity. I mean, I get it. He's just fun. I always like the trickster gods. What do you want from me?
Well, and also, those are really cool. I like the merch. But also, it feels like he's been adapted over time to just whatever traits are prized by the people of the day. Because back when it was a fertility and farming thing, those were the most valuable traits. And now, the traits we have are, again, like I said, medicine and commerce.
Take me home.
I'm actually not a big fan of West Virginia. I got stuck on a 28-hour train ride through the Midwest one time, and the hours we spent passing through West Virginia were some of the slowest, most uncomfortable hours of the ride. The view was really depressing compared to the scenic coast. Also, it seemed like half the train was determined to smoke a chimney at every available stop. But that's not West Virginia's fault.
I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama.
And see, meanwhile, I lived in West Virginia during a couple formative years of my life, and so country roads, you almost salute.
Take me home, country roads.
It also helps that Red is like a badass singer, you know? So that version of Country Roads is pretty awesome. I also love, oh no, I lost the cave. Shoot, where was the cave? This also makes sense too. Of course his temples would be in caves because a cave is where he came from, at least according to the lore. So that is Hermes. I feel like honestly, Red's videos make me feel like I'm a kid again, in a really weird sense. I'm kind of looking down, being all bashful. But because when you were a kid, like, you loved learning about gods and, like, you know, the different deities and legends and myths and lore and stuff like that. And that's why, like, I keep doing these, even though I know some people are more interested in Hamilton or whatever, but they're fun. I don't know. It takes you back to, like, a more chill time. Again, kind of like me playing Ninja Turtles did the other day. You know, you go back to when life was simpler and all you had to worry about was if the good zoo books were going to be at the Scholastic Book Fair so you could read them, you know, when your class went down there to get stuff. I'm rambling. I know I am. If you're feeling the nostalgia, I appreciate you for it. But make sure to see if you're subscribed. It helps the channel out a ton. Take care, as always, friends, and I will see you next time.